Major spoiler warning. I'm about to spoil the F out of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, so if you haven't seen it yet, pause this, go and watch that, and when you're done wiping your tears, come back here and hit play, because we're about to go deep. Here are 18 or so things, give or take, that you and everyone else missed in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
What?
Let's go! As is standard with any and every Marvel Studios film or series, when Guardians 3 starts, we are greeted with a patented and unique Marvel title sequence. The pages flipping by in this particular instance are of course that of Guardians of the Galaxy comic books, in particular the Annihilation event where James Gunn pulled a lot from for this movie, but more on that later. It should be noted that the majority of these panels focus on Rocket Raccoon, which makes total sense considering this whole film is primarily focused on Rocket and his whole life before he joined the Guardians. It should also be noted that the typical epic and adventurous happy-go-lucky fanfare music isn't present during this title sequence because the overall tone of the movie is quite emotional and heavy, so this makes perfect sense. This movie features a ton of flashbacks from Rocket Raccoon's early years and time spent with the High Evolutionary. One of these flashbacks sees the High Evo's evolutionary chambers in action, as he transforms a turtle into basically a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. Cowabunga, dude! Anyhow, High Evolutionary's chambers engulf these lower life forms in some sort of mist before evolving them millions of years in an instant, which turns them mad moments later. This mist and outcome is similar to the process and effects of the Terrigen crystals and Terrigen mist seen in past Marvel television shows such as Inhumans and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which are canonical to the MCU, and I'll fight you over that statement. The Terrigen crystals burst open and spray a mist that activates inhuman genes in people, unlocking their hidden powers. Furthermore, the Terrigen crystals have driven people mad and evolved them into creatures. Perhaps the High Evo's chambers use something to the effect of Terrigen mist? Who knows? No character has had such a unique time-lapse throughout their MCU tenure quite like Groot, or Groot's offspring, or whatever these different versions of Groot we keep meeting are. Teen Groot, Baby Groot, Groot. Well, in Guardians Volume 3, Groot is the biggest and most powerful form that we have seen him to date. His powers are way stronger, he can grow to gigantic proportions, spawn multiple arms, grow wings and fly, and many other abilities that are all on display in this movie. Aesthetically speaking, Groot looks like what is referred to as King Groot because he sort of has a crown on his head, which is the version of Groot we see primarily in the cartoons and video games. The most impressive reveal, however, is the fact that Groot can talk normally this whole time. Yep, Groot tells the Guardians, "I love you guys," and boy, what a reaction it got in my theater. One theory that makes this moment even more special is that in the moment Groot finally talks, he's actually still just saying, "I am Groot."
I know who you are already!
It's just that the audience can understand him now too because we are also part of their family. It's okay, just let the tears flow. It's good for you. I'm sure you know by now that the OG MCU Guardians aren't the same as the OG Guardians from the comics, but that original comic book lineup has still been featured in James Gunn's films in the form of Starhawk's Ravagers. Starhawk is played by the iconic Sylvester Stallone, and his team consists of the original Guardians of Earth 691 from the comics, otherwise referred to as Guardians 3000. In the movies, Yondu used to be a part of this team, and besides he and Starhawk, it consists of Mainframe, who was played by Miley Cyrus in Guardians 2 but was recast by Tara Strong in Guardians 3, who also voices Ms. Minutes in the Loki series. Michael Rosenbaum returned as Martin X, but his face was CGI to look more like the actor in this film. Kruger returns and uses the same magic as Doctor Strange at some point. Unfortunately, neither Michelle Yeoh or Ving Rhames returned as Aletta O'Gord or Charlie 27 respectively, but I'm sure they were just on assignment. During Guardians Volume 3, there's a scene where the Guardians wear these vibrant different colored astronaut suits as they attempt to infiltrate Counter-Earth. Now, beyond looking like those sus characters from the video game Among Us and matching the vibrant aesthetic of the original Guardians of the Galaxy comic books, these rainbow-like spacesuits are actually inspired by something else entirely.
You were right.
James Gunn confirmed that these suits were designed to pay homage to the spacesuits from Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. Excellent. While on the subject of attire, if you've so much as even seen the trailer for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, you'll have noticed the team's snazzy new blue and red uniforms. Well, these suits were pulled straight from the comic book pages and the Annihilation storyline, where the Guardians don these same outfits for the first time. This just so happens to be the same story arc where Phyla Vell joins the Guardians, more on her in a few minutes, as well as Adam Warlock, who we will get to in a few seconds, both of whom join the roster in this film. Coincidence? I think not. Now we're getting to obscure and deep cuts, but this is a good one, I assure you. Bova Ayrshire is a highly evolved cow and one of the High Evolutionary's first ever creations. You're probably wondering why I'm bringing this up. Well, let me explain. Early in Guardians 3, there's a scene on Nowhere where Rocket drinks space milk from a refrigerator with milk written on it in Kree. In the WandaVision series, during the opening theme song of episode 2, you can see Bova milk written on a carton at the grocery store. Now, why is this significant and why are people teasing a cow? Well, in the comics, Wanda has deep connections with both Bova and the villain of Guardians 3, the High Evolutionary. Bova helped save Wanda and Quicksilver as babies, taking them to Mount Wundagore, where the High Evo is said to have enhanced the super siblings' abilities. All before Bova dropped them off with their adoptive parents, the Maximoffs. Could these Bova Easter eggs be moving our attention towards them for a reason? Get it? Okay, never mind. Speaking of the High Evolutionary, he is 1/6 cyborg. In the comics, High Evo is a doctor named Herbert Wyndham, who experiments on and evolves himself into a being with godlike power levels. This destroys his face, and so he encases himself in a crimson and metallic suit. In the MCU, the High Evolutionary is some sort of humanoid AI geneticist that garners his powers from his advanced suit and technology that he's evolved himself with. This movie explains how it was actually Rocket Raccoon who maimed High Evo's face, tearing it off entirely, which is why it looks fused to his head. As it were, Peter Quill makes a series of hilarious and nostalgic jokes throughout the movie, calling the villain things like RoboCop because they look the same, Skeletor because Evo has no face, and of course the climactic battle is referred to as the final face-off. This is in reference to the Nicolas Cage and John Travolta movie where they literally take their faces off and swap them. So as I mentioned a moment ago, Adam Warlock is a heavily featured character in Guardians 3, and even becomes a full-fledged member, but we'll talk about that later. In the comics, Warlock was created by the Enclave and given the name Adam by a person on Counter-Earth. In the MCU, Warlock was created by the High Evolutionary and his mom gave him the name Adam. In the comics, Warlock was created to challenge other worlds' powerful beings like the Avengers, but escaped to learn about life in the cosmos alone. In the MCU, Warlock was created to serve the High Evo, but escapes to learn about life in the cosmos as a part of the Guardians of the Galaxy. The comic book Warlock had the Soul Stone implanted in his head by the High Evo. The MCU Warlock has a gem in his forehead, but it isn't the Soul Stone. Instead of being sent after Man-Beast like the books, in the movie he's sent after Rocket Raccoon. Although these differences seem great on a surface level, they actually parallel Warlock's origin stories quite well. Actor Nathan Fillion is a good friend of James Gunn's, and because of this friendship, the thespian has landed a role in all 3 of the Guardians movies, portraying different characters in each one. In the first Guardians flick, Fillion voices the big blue alien that bullies Peter Quill in the prison. In the sequel, he is seen on posters in the background as the actor Simon Williams, aka Wonder Man in Marvel Comics. In the trilogy film, Nathan plays the lead guard of the Orgo Sentries, who are your typical henchmen fodder for our heroes to beat up. While on the topic of James Gunn's friends and family, and beyond just Nathan Fillion, Gunn always casts a ton of familiar faces and voices, if you pay attention to his movies. Gunn's mentor Lloyd Kaufman has appeared in all 3 Guardians films in some capacity. His wife Jennifer Holland appears as an Orgo officer in this film, as well as many of Gunn's DC projects, which seems to make a lot of fans angry for some reason. From minor roles in hidden cameos played by Pete Davidson to main characters like Kraglin played by James's brother Sean Gunn, James Gunn likes to put his family and friends in his movies. And who can blame him? The Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special is an actual thing that actually happened in the MCU, and it served as sort of a Guardians Volume 3 prequel or Guardians Volume 2.5 if you will. One major plot point that may or may not have gotten a payoff during the 3rd Guardians film involves Nebula's and the Winter Soldier's arms. During the holiday special, Nebula retrieves Winter Soldier's arm off screen for Rocket, who said previously he would make sure he got that arm. In Guardians 3, Nebula newly possesses a super awesome arm that can transform into weapons and be used in a variety of different ways. It's also revealed that Rocket designed this arm for Nebula. Is it fashioned out of the Winter Soldier's arm? How will Bucky address this the next time we see him in the MCU? Time will tell. As I mentioned way back at the start of this video, Guardians 3 is primarily focused on Rocket Raccoon, and so naturally, there are a plethora of Easter eggs and tidbits of information about our furry friend that could easily go missed or overlooked. So let's get into some of them. After being offended by Quill calling him a raccoon throughout the Guardians series, Rocket discovers that he actually is a raccoon. Rocket rescues a bunch of baby raccoons that were held in the same cage that he was an infant, and these raccoons are actually his distant relatives. 4 different actors did Rocket's voice in the movie, depending on the character's age, including Bradley Cooper. The deepest of the cuts of all Easter eggs involving Rocket refers to James Gunn's initial pitch that he sketched of Rocket solving a math equation that he gave to Kevin Feige, which was then turned into a poster for Guardians 3 all these years later. This sketch was also paid off in a scene during a flashback in the flick, where Rocket Raccoon solves an equation that makes High Evolutionary's creations peaceful. Speaking of Rocket and Quill, the two are thick as thieves, and that's proven tenfold in Guardians Volume 3. One of the biggest payoffs in the entire Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy comes in the form of Star-Lord Zune. For those of you not old enough to remember Zune, it's an MP3 player. And if you're not old enough to remember MP3 players, then, well, I'm just old. Anyhow, at the start of Guardians 3, Rocket is using Quill's Zune and listening to Creep by Radiohead. He comes across a drunken Star-Lord who's drinking his depression surrounding Gamora away. Quill screams at Rocket for using his Zune before passing out and falling on his face. To make a long story short, at the end of the movie, most of the Guardians agree to part ways, with Rocket staying on to lead the new iteration of the group. During the mid-credits scene, Rocket is sitting with the new Guardians as they all discuss their favorite songs. Rocket goes very last and says that his favorite song is Come and Get Your Love by Redbone, which is the very first song we hear Star-Lord listening to during the first Guardians movie. It's then revealed that before Quill left for Earth, he actually gifted his Zune to Rocket. Rocket pulls the Zune out of his pocket and puts on the aforementioned Redbone track as he leads the new Guardians into battle. This movie is just so beautiful. Continuing along with Rocket's friends and heart-wrenching moments, Guardians 3 introduced us to a few buddies from Rocket's past that he tragically lost along in his harrowing journey. 2 of these characters, Teefs the Walrus and Floor the Bunny, was created by James Gunn for this movie. Lylla the Otter, however, was pulled straight from the comic books, believe it or not. In the books, Lylla is presented as Rocket's soulmate. In the MCU, Lylla and Rocket are just incredibly close friends, but regardless, their bond was, and always will be unmatched. Interestingly enough, Lylla is voiced in the movie by Linda Cardellini, who also plays Hawkeye's wife, Laura Barton, aka Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., aka Mockingbird in the MCU. So as I said a mere moment ago, Peter Quill decides to return to Earth after the High Evolutionary is defeated and the original Guardians disband. Quill learns to accept the fact that the alternate timeline Gamora is a different person than the Gamora he knew and fell in love with, although they do become somewhat friendly when all is said and done. Instead of constantly running away from Earth and his past, Peter decides to embrace it and returns home to his grandfather. During the post-credit scene, Quill is shown living a more than comfortable and normal Earthling lifestyle, eating cereal while making small talk with his grandpa. Which brings me to the next thing you missed. In what is yet another callback to the first Guardians movie, the very end of Volume 3 is stamped with a graphic that reads in gigantic letters, "The legendary Star-Lord will return." This is of course referring to one of the very first interactions we have with Quill in the MCU, where he refers to himself as the legendary outlaw Star-Lord, and gets hit back with a, "Who?" This graphic confirms that although Star-Lord is comfortable for now, he will more than likely face some sort of cosmic or earthly threat somewhere down the line. This also implies that he could easily pop up in a future MCU movie or series at any time. But for now, Quill is going to lay low and relax for a while. Saving the best for last, the mid-credit scene gave us a glimpse of the brand new Guardians of the Galaxy led by Rocket Raccoon. This new iteration of the team consists of Groot, who looks like King Groot from the video games and cartoons, Kraglin, who learned to control his fin and arrow as well as Yondu, Cosmo the space dog, who's a full-blown telepath, Adam Warlock, who saves Star-Lord's life, Blurp, who's one of the High Evolutionary's escaped creations, and one more character who will be pivotal in the MCU moving forward. Phyla-Vell not only joins the Guardians in the comics, but is essentially the female version of Quasar. This means that just like Ms. Marvel and her Kree Nega bands, Phyla-Vell will eventually come across the Quantum Bands, which will enhance her powers to even greater levels. All I'm saying is, Phyla-Vell is heavily featured in Captain Marvel comics, and the Marvels movie is on its way soon. So much for no more Guardians in the MCU, huh? And there you have it, 18 things. Well, more like 20 or so things actually, that you missed in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Did I miss anything? Tell us in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe while you're down there so you don't miss any concealed comic content.